form as far as the broker etiquette and the sale, navigating the sale agreement. One of the things that is really, really important to me is that all agents get on board with the thought that this isn't about you. This is all about your buyers and your sellers. And oftentimes the agents get in the way of successful transactions. Our egos, our thinking, our discussion, the way we treat each other, we need to get out of the way. We need to be as professional as possible and let the buyer and seller transact business. And what I mean about us getting in the way, it's people being rude, people being condescending, agents acting like they're my clients and it's my job to fight for everything. Oftentimes that type of perspective ends up coming across very, very negative. So the golden rule of rules, really good relationships with other agents will ensure your long-term success. If I'm looking at multiple offers on one of my listings and I have somebody who's been difficult in the past, they're going to go to the bottom of the pile unless it's like, you know, clearly the best offer. But I'm not going to do my client a disservice, but you're going to hurt yourself if you don't work on having good relationships. And oftentimes it even comes down to sending a thank you note to the other agent at the end of a transaction for a successful transaction. I have some listing agents that send me a $5 Starbucks card after, if I've got the buyer side. Thanks so much, it was great doing business with you. And so just always thinking about that the client also includes the other agent, because that's helping you be successful by having good relationships. Don't create an adversarial relationship. I had an agent just this week he needed an extension on a transaction, on a closing, and they needed an extension, and I had the seller, and the seller really wasn't wanting to give it was a second extension they had asked for, and they wanted something in return. And the seller, the selling agent said, well, we wouldn't be in this situation if you had not asked for a pre-approval letter.
What?
Because he had sent me a pre-qualification letter, which is different. It means that they have not checked out their credit. And he said, if you had not pressed the need for a pre-approval letter, we wouldn't be in this delay. And I replied with, okay, the contract's set on this line, on this line, on this line, what's supposed to happen? You never told me that you got a pre-approval from Wells Fargo, but you went back to this online lender, and the online lender is not delivering. So it was like he was throwing it back at me. We don't do that. You take the high road. You say, okay, how can we be as nice? Let's just get through this and make everybody happy. We don't need to do that at all with each other. Always, always, always follow the showing instructions. I don't know if you have been told before, if you show a property that is not, and you have not checked on the showing instructions, if you don't follow the showing instructions, you can be fined up to $2,500. Which means, I'll give you an example of one of my mess-ups. Many years ago, I showed a house the night, like on a Thursday night I showed the house, and they said, no, the seller's out of town, go for it, it's great, go ahead and show it. The next morning, wasn't even 12 hours later, they wanted to see the house again. I did not call and confirm. I did not follow the showing instructions, and I went and opened the lockbox door, and the seller had come home in that 12-hour period. So I had a great agent on the other side. I called and just apologized, and but I could have been subject to a $2,500 fine. You could do it without even meaning to. It's not like anybody's doing it intentionally, although some people might do it intentionally, right? So call. And also, if you set up a buyer appointment and your schedule changes, call and tell the seller. These sellers are just turning their houses upside down. They're trying to be so accommodating. And then they leave the house, and then they're waiting. Sometimes they're waiting right down the street watching you come and go.
Yeah,
And you don't call and say, hey, I can't come. They are so upset. And then they call the listing agent and say, can you believe, they didn't come, they didn't call. I've been waiting for 2 hours outside my house, and they never even let me know. So be sure to call back and tell the seller, if you're having contact directly with the seller or with the listing agent, that your plans have changed and you're not going to show it. And I usually say, oh, I am so sorry, my buyer has decided on another house, or something has changed and I just can't get there. But be sure to be courteous all the way along the road. As far as contracts, it's really, really, really important to complete it thoroughly, to make sure that every initial is where it's supposed to be. Today, I'm going to have you guys initial and sign everything as if you were the buyer on the contract that we're going to go through. So you're going to see, okay, this is where it needs to be initialed, this is where it needs to be signed, this is what has to happen, or it's not complete and it will get sent back to you. Again, if you don't have everything done correctly, if you're not thorough in your paperwork, it just screams new agent. If I get an offer and the contract is poorly completed, and at the same time I have other offers, which offer am I going to look at more seriously? Just be aware that it's your job to do it right and to be thorough about it. It's always a good idea, anytime you're going to ask a senior agent, to do the contract yourself. I mean, if you're wanting help with it, go ahead and fill the whole thing out and then ask for help from somebody else to review it. It's a lot easier for an agent who wants to help you to review what you've done and say this needs to be changed, this needs to be changed, than for us to create it from the beginning and take that kind of time. So think about doing it yourself and then being updated if it's not correct. And knowing your contracts all the way through it's what's going to save you from ending up in court. I mean, really, truly know the contract. It's your job, no one else's job. It's not your principal broker's job to, explain it to you over and over again because you didn't know what it said. It's your job to know what it says. And if you do know what it says, you're going to gain the confidence of your clients. When you start to go through things and you start to explain things to them, and you say, well, this is what this means, and I really want you to be aware of this because this is important to you. These are the areas that you are protected. I'm going to make sure that you are not in a position to lose your earnest money because this, and this, I'm protecting you on that. So all of a sudden they feel like, oh my gosh, they have confidence in you. You've done them good, and they are at ease that you're in a very, sometimes very, very scary situation as they go into a new transaction. People don't do it often enough to be proficient at it individually. So when I meet with a new buyer, I always provide them, I try very hard to meet in my office with a new buyer. I invite them in. I want to find out more about them. I also want them to have a copy of all the forms that I'm going to put in front of them. So I will print off the forms that I'm showing you today and a couple others, but I would make sure that they have a copy of the forms before we get down to writing an offer. And there's a couple good reasons. We've gone so electronic, so that's so often. The first time, if you don't do that, the first time they see it is going to be on DigiSign or DocuSign. It's going to come flashing at them, and they've got to click, 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 sign, and they're not even, there's no way they could read it on the computer screen. So asking them to sign something that they haven't had an opportunity to read is just not fair. The engineers will feel offended because they're going to want to read it, and here you've thrown it at me and said sign, and without any consideration to how they think. And so do give them a copy of the contracts before you sit down and before you are writing an offer. Also explain the key clauses, explain their outs, explain here is when you have 5 days to review the seller's disclosure. You can walk for no reason. You can get your earnest money back for no reason with a seller's disclosure if for some reason there's something that you can't live with. There's another 5 days when you have the preliminary title report. This is an opportunity for you to back out if there's something in the prelim or the CC&Rs or something that you can't live with. What would that be? It could be as simple as I had somebody who was a ham radio operator. I didn't know it. I got in, this was like my second transaction, we got into closing, and he looks at the CC&Rs and says it's prohibited. Ham radios are prohibited in my neighborhood. And I was brand new, I had no clue. He fortunately was in television, and he knew how to filter, and we ended up putting flagpole in his front yard, and that became his antenna, and nobody could see. And he knew how to make sure that he wasn't going to interfere with anybody's. So it ended up working, but I ended up giving up commission over that. Okay, so just know that if you haven't done things to help people to understand. So that they've got 5 days to review that. Once they get the preliminary title report, they can back out. Make sure they get it. And the transaction that I was referring to, we don't know that the buyer ever got the preliminary title report on the loss one that I have with the wire fraud. We don't know if the buyer ever got the preliminary title report, which is like, their 5 days doesn't start. I got it, the other agent got it, but we're not sure the buyer ever got it. And that's the titles company's responsibility to do that. Another thing is once you do the general home inspection, explaining the general home inspection process. Oftentimes you don't have another opportunity to go into a lot of detail. So those things are, just plant the seeds so that the buyers understand that there's a process here. Yes, it's overwhelming, but I'm going to help break it down so it's not going to be as overwhelming when it comes to them. If you over-communicate, you're going to end up with happy clients. Just think about, okay, I know I've said this before, please forgive me, but I just want you to understand, to know this is what's going to happen. And a lot of us, especially if we've been around for a while, don't think about letting everybody know the process. We kind of go rote, and then we realize, oh, they didn't know what was going to happen, and I didn't take the time to tell them. So you guys are definitely ahead of the game, because you're going to be sure to give them what they need to know. Okay, now we're going to start into the agreement here. This is the residential sale agreement. There are several agreements, just so you know, and you can just keep this in the back of your mind. There is a new construction agreement. So if you are selling a new house, always ask the listing agent what forms they use. Oftentimes the builder will have their own forms, and that's true of national builders like D.R. Horton or Polygon. They all have their own forms. Smaller builders will say, go ahead and use the OREF. This is the Oregon Real Estate Forms group, and go ahead and use that form. If they tell you to use that form, there is the new construction form. There's a condo and townhouse form. There's a, there's a houseboat form. There's several forms. So be sure that what you're selecting matches the property you're trying to sell. Oftentimes, and I just had it happen recently where somebody sent me on a new construction that I have, they sent me a residential that didn't include all the language. And in the new construction agreement, there's all kinds of things that are different, such as early issue title insurance, what about the completion date, what can they make any changes on the property, it's all in there. So if it's not the right one, I had to send it back and they had to do it again. And buyers don't like to be, have to do things twice. I mean, many times they're very, very patient, but it helps when we do our job and give them the right form. So whenever I'm going to do a new transaction, I always pull the client full from the RMLS. And the client full has everything I need on it. It has the RMLS number. It also has the tax ID number. Those two things are what really helps you to move ahead. So on this one, I'm going to set it up as a purchase. I'm going to put it in, and I'm going to put it in that this is the buyer, and the buyer in this one is Joseph, P.H., a buyer. And I'm not going to fill all this out, believe me, you're not going to sit here forever. But I wanted to show you a couple things that are easy here. Now, I just need to get it. So in this case, this is the listing number. Have you had any zip forms classes yet? Not yet, right? You did? No, okay.
We'll be scheduling one at the Bethany office if anybody wants to come pretty soon or something.
Okay.
Because they're making a ton of changes too.
Yeah, it's a totally different format, and so like my principal broker had a hard time trying to navigate it through my system because it's changed so much. So I know that Marcus also.
I have 6 days until I have to update it, so I've just been writing that out.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's changing everything? They're changing the whole thing?
It's like really hard to navigate.
Yeah, it is. So we'll schedule a class on getting on the
Yeah.
updates to zip
Okay.
forms too. So.
Well, and I'm very old school, I kind of do things the long way all the time, so.
I'm not
Yeah,
looking
so it's
forward to
good.
the change. Do it the same
But
way.
this, I'm sure, will be the same, that if you complete these different headings here, you will find that it's a lot easier to get the forms done, and it'll be a lot easier. So in this case, the property, instead of, we're gonna put in, let's see, zip, you use this, right? You use Zip Forms Connect in this? So
Mhm.
you're,
I don't use it this way actually. I use it
you probably use.
I just use the cover. I do the cover
Yeah.
sheet and then it auto populates everything else.
Okay.
This is I should do it this way though. This is the way that you should do it, but that's just the way I learned. So just like everybody else out there.
Okay, and you're, can I just put this up here then?
Yeah, it's a Horst tie, all cap. I don't know if that matters, but the password is try ITS DASHOE 5. That might be wrong. Nope. There, let me try a couple different ones.
Can, after the class today, is it possible that someone can just instruct me on which zip form package I should purchase?
Yeah,
Because
I can do that for you.
I don't even know which one.
It says the Zip Forms Plus. Where would you guys
Okay.
see that?
Because I went out there and it's like, okay, which one do I choose?
Yeah, because there's Zip Form Plus, then there's also like the other,
There's other
the
ones.
DigiSign too in there with
Yeah.
it. And
Okay,
Does that work?
yep, I did, great.
it took me a while to figure it out.
Yeah,
I
it's
just
the
wanted-
Zip Forms Plus. It's the basic one. It's I can show you that.
So we've just imported this. When you import it, the wonderful thing about using it this way is everything's there. You've got the address, it's not gonna be a mistake with the legal description. There's not gonna be a typo in the address. You need, you know, you guys just got out of school, you know you need to have a very clear description of what you're selling, and if it's the information's incorrect. So this takes away the human error.
Yeah, this is the way you're supposed to do it.
So you want to be sure to do that, and then you put in the parties. And here you put in the name of your buyer and their email address. You put in all the information, and then all of it populates in the form. And that, so you don't have to add that again. The buyer's name, the seller's name, your name is in there. All of the providers, the title company, you put in the title company that's being requested in the listing form. There is a spot that says preferred title company. You put all of it in, and by putting it into Zip Forms, when you push populate, it just all there. And then you just go in and you change out a few things. You go ahead and change the sales price to what you want. You add the items that are needed. So I just want you to know you don't have to start over from zero, and you're not responsible to have to do a lot of the things that are really, really detailed, but this is something that will be so much easier if you just know how to use Zip Forms. Wouldn't you say, Tyler, isn't it save you a lot of time when you do it right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If you put in,
Huge
if you
time
put in
saver.
the email addresses, and then you go to the signing program that you insert into Zip Forms, you actually, it populates everything. It pulls up your signing program along with all the email addresses, and all the signatures are all then placed. So it makes it so much easier when you do it from this forum, as opposed to doing it from your email, your signing program.
DigiSign.
DigiSign.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, wanting to go back here. So I wanted to talk to you about, as we're going through, I want you, you are the buyer in this transaction, okay? So on each of these forms, you're gonna need to have to initial under here at the buyer side. And we're gonna start back up, flip back to your packet of information behind the contract. There is the Oregon disclosure pamphlet. This is your Oregon disclosure pamphlet. This is your statutory required disclosure pamphlet. If you have done your job right before you get to the part of writing an offer, you will have already provided this to your buyer as your legal responsibility to do so. And when I give it to my buyer, I say I am legally responsible to give this to you. So they know that I'm following the law. You're reassuring them that you know what you're doing. So you have the, I've already gone through this with them, and I'm not gonna go through it with you today, but I go through the Oregon disclosure pamphlet, and I explain as the buyer's agent, these are my responsibility. I need to deal honestly and openly with you. I need to, honestly in good faith, to present all offers, notices, and communications to the other parties in a timely manner to disclose material facts. I tell them that if they tell me something that would not benefit them, then I do not disclose it. So if they say, well, I'm making an offer at 305, but I can go to 307, can we tell them, can we tell the other agent that they can go higher? No.
No.
We're legally responsible to protect our buyer, and that's what we're doing. So this is the form that they must sign. This is the, we call it the disclosed, it's a disclosed limited agency for buyers. There's one for sellers also. It's the DLA, and you want to sign down here on the DLA if you've gone back to this form, and sign as the buyer. You're Joseph A. Buyer. Sign as the buyer, and also sign as the selling agent. Sign where it says buyer's agent's signature. I know that your name doesn't match up here, but do it anyway. It'll help you to have a record of what it's supposed to be looking like. So,
Thanks.
do you see this? You know this one?
Yeah.
You're good. Okay. So, after you have that, when it comes down to the final agency acknowledgement, now we're going back to the form, the first page of the form. This top part actually is acknowledging that you've done this part. Okay, so when I'm sitting down with my buyer, if I'm sitting across from them doing that, I make sure that it looks that way. These are the forms, and then this is, now you're acknowledging what I've just given you. If it's on DocuSign or DigiSign, I put these in with my offer. I put them in, and they have to initial on this page, on the statutory Oregon disclosure pamphlet. They have to initial this, and then they sign this. And make notes on this stuff if it's, I know it doesn't make sense, but you'll know it. Yeah, it will, sooner or later it will. So as you're in this final agency acknowledgement period, you're gonna sign up here as Joseph A. Buyer and date it. You're also going to initial the bottom where I've already initialed, where it says JB. That would be you on the following pages. So in this case, everything is filled. Everything's been pre-filled on this one. You are then inserting the sales price, and you're inserting the amount of your earnest money. Usually earnest money, we talk about it being about 1%. As a listing agent, it's important to me that it's close to that if possible. If I get what is the advantage of having more earnest money? You look serious, right? What's the disadvantage of having more earnest money?
More money to lose it.
More money to lose. So you don't want to say, okay, let's just throw big earnest money on everything and you're going to get the offer. You don't want to be like that, but at the same time, if you know you're in a multiple offer situation and your buyer can afford to lose more than 1%, sometimes you up it a little bit, but I don't get crazy with earnest money. As the listing agent, I want to see that it's adequate. I would like, on a house at $315,000, I would like to see $3,500 in earnest money. That would be, as a listing agent, when I think $3,000 to $3,500.
To at least 2,500, I'd say. I would like to see on an offer.
Yeah, well, and I feel like that's kind of skinny,
Mm-hmm.
and I might send it back and say, hey, can I have some more earnest money? And I'd rather not do that. I'd rather have it just go through.
What is the ratio there?
1%,
Purchase price.
1% of the sales price, the offer price. Again, you know, Tyler has a point. I mean, if you've got a buyer who just does not have any money to lose, you can do that. And if currently, at this time, things are not moving really fast, you're not competing with a bunch of offers, that might be totally adequate, and it might slide through. And very seldom, if it's the only thing on an offer that I don't like, I'm not gonna go back and ask for more earnest money, if everything else is okay. That's kind of like being petty and creating a situation. When you counter something like that, they can walk away based on that counter. Nobody wants to encourage a buyer to walk away. So in this form, you're also including the additional down payment. In this case, I believe this was a 10%, 5% loan. So page 1 is pretty much complete. I didn't talk about that. Do a comparative market analysis on the property before you write the offer. Have you had the CMA class yet?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Okay.
So
Well,
Dave will
that'd be
do
Dave.
that next week, and he does that's one you don't want to miss. It is so much great information. It sets you apart. He gives you information and gives you a sheet. Okay, these are the different, this is how an appraiser sees it. This is equivalent of what an appraiser would adjust for on these items. If you sit down and you show your buyer or your seller a CMA that shows that you're acknowledging that they have an air conditioning unit, but the comp did not. I mean, there's all these adjustments that are made. You're not an appraiser, but you're analyzing it more than just saying, you're analyzing it to show the differences. Sellers love to hear you say, oh, your property is better than this property, and this is why, and I'm going to give you more value because you're better. That's all, sellers love to hear that kind of stuff. So do come to that class. You're not gonna be sorry if you do. Never write an offer without letting the agent know it's coming. You don't know if it's still available. The first thing I do when I've got an interested buyer is I call the other agent. I say, I have an interested buyer. I'm just checking in to see if there's any offers on the table. If the market is if it's brand new on the market, I'll ask what they have as a plan to review offers. Are you going to review them right away? Are you going to review them as they come in, or are you going to hold them until a date in the future? And during the summer and the spring, it was crazy where everybody was waiting till Sunday. So they put a house on the market on Thursday, and we'll hold it and not review offers until Sunday. And there's all kinds of strategies on that, whether that makes sense as the listing agent. Some buyers walk away under their circumstance. They say, I don't want to compete, and I'm out of here. Other buyers wait until Sunday morning to write an offer. And what happens? They got a cash offer on Saturday, and they're not waiting till Sunday. They said they were, but they're not going to.
Yeah.
So it really would be a good idea just to get that offer in there, get the best offer in there when you have the opportunity to do it. First of all, your buyer will feel you've protected them. And if you call them back and say, oh, it's sold, and you didn't get your offer in, are they going to look at you like you didn't take good care of them? We all want to take care of our clients. I always ask if there's other things that are important to the seller. Do they need to have a rent back? Do they need to have they found a new home? I had a couple recently that I was the listing agent on, and they thought they had a property identified, but they weren't sure. So they asked for 60 days, and it was in a high price point, and they said, I'd like 60 days without rent. And it was a cash offer, so they got to stay 60 days, no rent payment. They were able to find a property and move. It worked so smoothly, and everybody was really, really happy. So call and ask what the seller needs so that you can tailor as much as possible for your buyer's needs and that seller's needs. It doesn't always work to do the 60-day thing. I mean, that was exceptionally unusual, but make sure that you've asked the questions. I mentioned here, if the property is a rental property in Portland, be aware of new rental ordinances. Have you talked at all about that? That there's a new ordinance in Portland that says that if a property is a rental, in order for the seller to sell that property, they are required, without cause, they are required to pay their tenants to relocate. So let's say they are in the middle of a lease. That's what has to happen. They have to pay their tenant to relocate. So it's a very complicated, detailed law, but it's costs the seller a lot of money, and sometimes the buyer will offer to pay the relocation costs to make your offer look better to the seller if you are writing the offer as the buyer.
Would that still be the case if it were selling a rental property to somebody who intends to keep it as a rental, but they can maintain the lease?
No.
Yeah, okay. So it's just if Tyler here was selling his rental property and I was trying to buy it as my house to live in, then that would be when that comes in, because we're discontinuing the lease.
Right,
Right.
right.
A lot of times what is happening is the seller is asking the tenant to leave so that they can remodel the house
Yeah.
and then put it on the market for a much higher price.
Right.
Is that just in Multnomah County? That
No, it's the
ordinance?
city of
Portland.
City of Portland.
And it's 2,800 for a 1-bedroom up to 4,200 for a 3-bedroom.
Which is, and if you, let's say you've got a complex or plexes, that's per unit.
So the sellers are working around the law, they're doing the loophole where they just say they're gonna remodel, they don't tell them that and they can get by that without having to pay that debt.
I don't think so.
There's no loophole?
No.
No, it's really not only on the sale of property, it's if you, no-cause eviction.
Well, a lot of tenants don't know about the law, so they don't really leverage it, and a lot of times they don't have to pay the relocation, but they can use, but technically they're supposed to pay the relocation fee.
So the actual winners don't know the law, so they end up losing, actually.
I thought on a month-to-month lease though, both the landlord and the tenant have the ability to give 30 days notice. Is that not?
Well, that's month to month.
Yeah.
It's not a lease.
Not
Oh,
very
gotcha,
good.
okay.
Yeah.
Yep, and it also applies if there's a rent increase of, I think it's like 7% or more. So if you increase the rent on your tenants and it causes them to need to move because they can't afford it,
Right.
you also have to pay the relocation fee.
But there might be more to that too, that you have to pay like 1 month of rent too for their first month out of it. I know there's more to that.
It's very
maybe.
onerous, yeah.
I think there's more to that.
And it's looking like it's
Not
going to
just
go
relocation.
statewide. Is it gonna go statewide? I don't know where it is in the
I
legislature.
believe
Right now
so.
it's just Portland, right now it's just the city of, it's not Multnomah County, it's the city of Portland. This is the Portland City Council voted this in.
I see.
Yeah.
Without any voter, yeah.
Probably without any feedback, because that's what City of Portland does.
Well, yeah,
Yep.
well,
They're consistently doing that all the time, they just make decisions and.
It was from all the feedback that they were getting from the renters associations and everybody who was upset because of the skyrocketing rent prices. And that was the cornerstone of Chloe Daly's campaign. That was what she campaigned to get onto the city council to do, was to help curb rent increases in the city of Portland.
And it sounds like a good thing, except that a lot of, for the buyers, the renters, it sounds like, well, that makes sense. Why should they be subject to these huge rent increases? But what happens is that tons of investors are saying, okay, I just won't buy any investment in Portland anymore.
Yeah.
I won't,
So
I
it's
just won't
true.
do it. So you're not gonna get the end result that people are looking for.
My understanding also is if you have multiple people in a house roommate situation, if you have a rental agreement with 4 different people in there, you have to pay that relocation for.
No,
That's
that
not
one-
true?
That's not true. Unless they passed a new ordinance within the last month or two,
Okay.
because I do that, and I read that letter for letter to
Okay.
see what my leverage on that situation would be, and you daily wanted that to be, but the other 4 were actually like, we're talking about somebody renting rooms out of their house. Calm down, you know. So if you're renting out of your house, then that's different.
Exception.
Yeah, that's the one exception to the rule.
Well, no, at your house, yeah, but I mean,
Yeah.
if you're a landlord and you've got tenants in the house and you've got rental agreements with 4 different people who have
Yeah.
rooms in that house,
Yeah.
that you're not living in?
Oh,
Okay,
then
that was
you're not
my-
living, if you're not living in it.
Yeah,
that's
you're not
a
living
different
in it,
thing.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, with
That's
roommates,
what I'm
it's,
talking
yeah,
about.
okay, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not talking about your
Yeah,
roommates that
if-
you
Yeah,
have.
if you're treating a house like,
Yeah.
like 4 separate little mini units for each bedroom, then yeah, that applies.
And that applies to a 7% increase.
I don't quote me on the exact number, but it is, if you price somebody out of their unit based on a certain trigger number, then yeah, it does count in. But like if you raise it like 1, 2, or 3%, and they come out with that, then that's not necessarily, I don't think, but.
So what's happening is
Alright.
everybody is
It's
going to the
complicated.
max that they can go, but without
Triggering that.
triggering that.
Yeah.
So everybody's,
Yeah.
if it's 10%, everybody's increasing every year 10%, if that's what they're allowed. Which, again, a lot of landlords wouldn't, because, hey, they've got a great tenant, they would like to keep them. They may not do that but then if they feel like, okay, I've got my hands tied, if I don't do this now, I'll
Mhm.
never be able to get it done, then they're doing it. So it's kind of like shooting yourself in the foot, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so going back to, we talked about the disclosed limited agency for the buyers. Okay, so we're going to this, once you get the final agency acknowledgement, when you fill out, you'll fill out this online with the down payment and the earnest money. Be sure to, this is oftentimes one of the boxes that's missed is on line 43. At closing and upon delivery of a deed or a contract, the balance of the purchase price is. The thing that's missing is whether it's a deed or a contract. Almost all the time, you're gonna be doing a deed unless you're dealing with large parcels of land or farms or something where there's a land sale contract being done or a commercial situation. So line 43 will be deed most of the time. On the next section over, be sure to call out any fixtures that are in the property. If you have a refrigerator, if there's a washer dryer. I always make an effort, if there is a refrigerator, washer dryer, to include the make. I'll either say washer dryer on the premises as of this date, or I'll put in the make and model if I got that when I was coming through. The reason is, if you just say refrigerator and washer dryer, I had a time where the beautiful gas range was flipped out for a cheap electric range when the buyer took possession. So to be as specific as possible, it takes away all doubt. That doesn't happen often, but it has happened.
Sue told me I should be taking pictures if we want the appliances.
That's a good,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. It's not a bad idea, you want to be as specific as possible. On section 4, balance of the purchase price, this is where you're explaining how the property is being purchased. I'm on line 55, section 4, page 2 of the sale agreement. If it's a cash transaction, if the buyer says it's a cash transaction and they say they will give you evidence of cash deposits, 5 days after, if I'm the listing agent, I'll come back and say the house will remain on the market until I have a chance to look at the cash evidence. So I, as much as possible, try to get that. Some buyers don't want to show their cards on the table, that they've got, $3 million in the bank on one bank account, and they don't want you to see that they have $250,000 cash. So that's okay, but I want it the day after. On acceptance, I want to have evidence of cash deposits. So try to make that as short as possible. Most people who are paying with cash have, what are some of the evidences? You can take a statement, online statement of their bank account. You remove the account numbers. As long as it says what the institution is and it has to look like it's a formal, a real place. We don't want it to look like it's fraudulent. So either you get it from your lender, or you get it from your bank that you have it. I've had trustees write things that they have this much money in their account. Sometimes people will accept that, other times people will look at a trustee statement saying that they have these funds and say, well, I'd like to see the account that has the buyer's name on it to know you're just making a general statement, but I want to see some evidence. So if you have a cash transaction, the seller has an opportunity to review that information, and if it doesn't look like it's real, they can ask for further clarification, or they can reject it and say, give me another evidence of cash deposits. And I'm sure you can understand why that might be a big deal. You take a house off the market, you know, everybody jumps through hoops, and all of a sudden you find out they're not real. They're just playing games. And that doesn't happen often, but it definitely has happened. In this case, the balance of the purchase price is going to come from an FHA loan. The FHA loan is going to require a 3.5% down, so that must be what I had in there. The pre-approval letter, make sure it's a pre-approval, not a pre-qual.
Is there a reason why some other loan programs are not on here, like USDA or like,
Because you can go down to other on line 69 and put in USDA.
okay, and would that include any monies received from Cash Advantage or the Oregon Bond Program too?
Yes. Yeah, be specific as to what program, because all those programs, if the listing agent isn't familiar, they may want to get a little bit more information on that so that they know what they're telling their seller as far as timeframes and closing. If there's financing contingencies, if you have a property that is subject to, you know, in this case, they're saying the property must qualify for the loan, the lender's appraisal shall not be less than the purchase price. But if maybe there's another financing contingency, maybe maybe you went through the house and you knew that they are going to need a roof. That's something that you might write in. You don't, from a selling agent's perspective, a listing agent's perspective, you don't ever want to see that because you don't want to have the buyer dictating something in the contract that's going to require action by the seller in regards to their lender. It's just not a good thing. I'm going to flip down to section 5.2, failure of a financing contingency. If there's a failure, they need to notify you within 2 days. Shall promptly notify the seller within 2 days. The buyer and seller can terminate the transaction using the termination agreement or mutual agreement on the sales price. So let's say it doesn't appraise for as much as you wanted to appraise for. That's a sales price. This is where it gives you time for the buyer and seller to make adjustments. Does the seller drop the price? Does the buyer come to cash to close with more money? This allows you a remedy to low appraisal. And if the buyer, if they don't reach an agreement within 2 days of buyer receiving notification, offer automatically terminates and the seller can put it on the market. So the seller has some power here. If it doesn't appraise and you can't reach agreement, then there's opportunities to put it back on the market and get it going. Also in section 5.3, the buyer is making representation to the seller that the buyer's completed their application. The buyer shall submit a loan or they have completed or they will complete. And following receipt of the loan estimate from the buyer's lender, buyer will notify the lender of intent to proceed within how many days. This is something that the lenders are now starting to get their arms around. It's a new TRID requirement, and for a long time nobody even paid any attention to this, but it is obvious that there is a need for that. Lenders are trying to figure out how to manage this process, and some of them are coming up with a form that their buyers sign. And I'm just starting to get on my listings a copy of, yes, the buyers received the intent to proceed. They received disclosure from the lender, the loan estimate, and the buyer is now saying that they're really ready to go forward, and I'm getting forms, so just be aware that that will be coming through. The buyer will complete all paperwork necessary by the lender, including paying the fees where necessary. Buyers to keep the seller informed of anything, any changes of the loan program, loan application rejected, et cetera. So if you have your pre-approval letter from XYZ Bank and your buyer gets another pre-approval from another lender and the rate is better and they want to change, they can't change the lender or the program without going back to the seller and saying, you would write an addendum saying, buyer has changed the lender to XYZ lender, application has been made, closing is on time. That's how I would word something like that, and get all parties to sign it. You just can't move the loan around. We used to. There were times where we didn't know who was going to be the final lender in it, but now you need to disclose it up front.
What if it's the same lender, but they just reduced the loan? Does everyone need to sign off on that?
No, if they're going to put more money down.
Yeah.
No, if it goes from an FHA, from a conventional to an FHA, yes, that's a new program.
Mhm.
If it's a conventional and the down payment changes, that's not a problem.
And is it the opposite? So like say the loan increases, do you have to notify all parties or is it?
You know, if the loan increases and it's gonna go from a 20% down conventional to, you know, a 5% down
Mhm.
conventional, I would probably notify all parties just to be sure that everybody knows. It's not gonna, you know, seller's not gonna terminate a transaction. But if you don't do
Good
it,
etiquette.
if you don't do it, there's a possibility somebody can use that to
Okay.
get out of a transaction if they had a better offer in their back pocket.
Could the seller terminate based on that if they wanted to, based on change of loan terms?
I've never seen them do that,
Yeah, but,
yeah. I'm not sure,
okay,
I'm not sure.
fair enough.
Gary would have known the answer to that one.
Yes, he would.
Yeah,
You had answered everything.
yeah. Be sure to encourage your buyer before you get down to writing any offers to do their loan shopping. Let them check everywhere before, that's up to you. It's hard as a new agent to really impact where your borrowers go to. I have a few lenders that I always try to get them to talk to, whether or not they end up with them or not, and that's for a couple reasons, because I have confidence in those lenders that they're gonna do a good job and do everything they say they're gonna do. So if the buyer does go with the lender I suggest, it usually goes much more smoothly. Online lenders, while I'm sure there are times that it goes very smoothly, you can't even get a person usually to talk to be able to find out a status. And that really can impact how the whole transaction goes.
Well, it also gives you a snapshot of as to who your client really is too, because you've got some added information about vulnerability
Right.
and the borrower.
Right. And sometimes you don't know, I mean, like if I have if it's my contact, the lender that I use, they will say, you know, they're a little skinny, watch out for the taxes. If the taxes are too high, they won't be able to buy. I mean, I hear things that help me know how to even show them houses. What I mean by that, I don't know if that makes sense, but sometimes just having taxes instead of being $3,500, they're $4,500, all of a sudden they have to reduce their sales price that they're able to purchase because the taxes are too high.
And HOA fees too.
And HOA fees, yeah, absolutely. The appraisal, and this is on, the appraisal is on line 5.3 still. Okay, so the process is that after you write an offer, there is a period of time, there's the inspection period. In the old days, we always waited until after the inspection period to order the appraisal. And the reason for that is, why do you want to have your borrower pay money for an appraisal when they don't know if the house is going to pass inspection? And it totally makes sense. But the contract now says the buyer shall make a good faith effort to secure the ordering of the lender's appraisal no later than the expiration of the inspection period in section 10. So if, just make sure that you're watching that. Get that appraisal ordered as soon as possible, and you're not gonna be ordering it, but you're gonna be working with the lender to say, okay, now is the time. And let the buyer know. A lot of times the buyers don't understand that lenders usually require a payment from them for the appraisal at that time. And it'll be $700 to $800 now. It used to be $450, but our appraisals have gone up significantly in price. So let your borrower know that there'll be some payments out of their pocket at that time. The amount, the out-of-pocket expenses to your borrower are usually the appraisal, the inspections, and the application fee sometimes comes out, but usually that comes out at the end, when they close escrow. If there's any contingent source of funds, that's on line 109. So let's say somebody has they're getting a gift from their parents. They're waiting for the proceeds from the sale of another house. That would go on line 108. The down payment is coming from the buyer's 401k. Be sure you let them know if there's a contingent source of funds. That's required. There's also a clause right here. The buyer authorizes the buyer's lender to provide non-confidential information to the buyer and the seller's agents regarding the buyer's loan application status. So that allows me, as a listing agent, to call that lender and say, how's it going? And I tell my buyer that that's going to happen. Now the buyer, please understand that the listing agent can call the lender to check on things. Some people are really, really squirrely about their private information, and they don't like that, but if you let them know that this is just the way it is, it's going to be a lot less problems. Section 6.1, the insurance. The buyer is encouraged to promptly verify the availability and cost of property, fire, and casualty insurance. The situation there is there's something called a clue report. A clue report is a report that the lenders get, that if you order insurance, they check out that property and know if there's ever been any claims on that property before. If there's been a bunch of claims on the property, there's been fires, there've been floods, they've been, not flood, but like they've had appliances flood the house. Your insurance might be higher priced because of claims on that property in the past. So then when your borrower goes and makes application, they may be surprised with the cost of their property insurance. Those are things for you to be aware of. Just say, okay, just check it out. Call your lender, give them this address, see what your insurance costs are going to be. It's part of the whole picture.
Can they do that research based on the insured person as well to see if they're prone to more claims than average? Can it be the individual as well as the property?
I don't know. It may be that that's what they do. They look up the person's social security number or something, but I don't know. Yeah, it's a good question.
For insuring property, I've had the problem of who to talk to for knowing, like, is it from stud to stud or is it from the wall finishing in? And I talked to the bookkeeping company, I talked to HOA, and then on the board and the seller's agent, and no one really knew. And so what's your suggestion on where do you find that?
What we're talking about here is a property with a homeowners association. It may be a condo or townhome unit.
Yeah.
And oftentimes they're very, very different.
Mm-hmm.
And it's you get different information from everyone. And you can read the CC&Rs, and then there's all these amendments that have taken place. And the HOA said they would cover the siding at one point, but after claims and problems, there's an amendment that you have to dig out that says that siding is no longer covered, and that's where the confusion is.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way I know is to do your own, just pull up the CC&Rs, ask for all amendments to the CC&Rs, and read it. And I also tell my borrowers to do that. The buyer, because it's your job, but it's also their job. And it sounds nice for them to just say, gee, you tell me if it's covered. But guess what, that's a lot of liability. for you. So you sit there and say, oh yeah, the siding's covered. Well, guess what? Maybe you've missed something. So you want to make sure that you're always putting the responsibility back on the buyer,
Okay.
and not accepting total we have to be aware of that. Is that part of your scope of your expertise? No, to read preliminary title
Bylaws
reports and
and-
bylaws? Yeah,
No.
yeah. So be sure to put it back and say, here's the information. I would just really encourage you to read through it, and then have them talk to the HOA.
Have them do it?
Yeah. You are not responsible to be the.
Okay.
Well, their insurance agent is the expert in that particular case, right? They should know where to look to find that information as far as what they're covering.
They don't always know. Yeah.
And this is a very young HOA, and so it's a 2014 complex, and
Oh,
so
gosh.
they're still trying to figure everything out. So it's been a fun ride.
Yeah.
In my experience, the HOAs are usually pretty clueless, and you have to figure it out for yourself. It's kind of a weird
Okay.
fine line,
And it's true, you do, but at the same time, you want to be helpful, but you don't want to take on responsibility. So making sure that they have all the documents, making sure they've reviewed it too, and making sure you're sharing that with them.
Okay.
It's a fine line not to take on too much responsibility,
It is.
because if there is a lawsuit, you'll be named.
Awesome.
And I've never been sued in 35 years or more, so it's not like people are sue happy. If you operate in good faith and you always treat people well, they're not gonna turn around and look for reasons to
Mhm.
come after you. If you're a crook and you're dishonest, yes, it's gonna happen.
So you're saying help them to get the HOA documents, but don't help them review them?
Yeah. Let them interpret it.
Yeah.
Let them
Yeah.
interpret it.
Cool.
That's good.
And there's actually attorneys that you can hire to review HOA documents. And the attorneys will tell you, okay, this is the bottom line. And you could even have an attorney's name in your back pocket that you could suggest that they talk to. And that's especially important if there is a large reserve account, or let's say you get all of the information on the HOA, including we're gonna talk a little bit about this, including the amount that's in the reserve. And they also give you a maintenance schedule. It says they're gonna replace the roof on this year, and this year they're gonna do this, and this year they're gonna do this. Well, what does it all mean? Is there enough money there? You're not an expert. You don't know what it's gonna cost to do all these things. Is there a big assessment coming up soon? How do you say, oh, this looks good? Because we don't know. So I really wish there was an attorney.
Right, and right now, there's a lot of special assessments on condominiums around the Portland metro area, because attorneys are targeting condominiums, trying to get money out of it. So a lot of it is not actually, in writing that they're gonna have a special assessment, but there's talk about it. So, also, like, I had a situation where, I was on the listing side, and, basically I just disclosed it, that there's talk about it, and then I let them interpret the documents, and they went forward with it, so.
Right, right.
My experience, so I'm also on the HOA,
Uh-huh.
so where I live, I'm on the board, but I'm just a secretary, right? And another guy's the treasurer. And when he puts out the report about the reserves and the maintenance, and I had to, write it up after a meeting once, I had to look at it several times to even understand it. And I had
Yes.
to ask him, can you clarify this? So I can see how someone from the outside looking at it would just be totally confused about it too.
And it's a huge, and we're gonna talk a little bit about how that happens and how does that addendum work. The HOA addendum, there is one in here, it's really important to know how that works, so we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, flood insurance, elevations, EC, explain what an EC is and the process to obtain. Understand that it's due to change, the EC is the elevation certificate. We are now seeing them being issued because it's due to the federally subsidized flood insurance program. If the home is in a floodplain, flood insurance will be a significant expense. It's not unusual that it would be $1,500 a year to have flood insurance. So a lot of people will go forward with a property with flood insurance, but if they are a person with reserve funds and has a little cash flow, if they're skinny, that flood insurance will just throw them right out of the ability to qualify. So if I see flood insurance on a property and I know that a buyer is tight, I usually explain, I know that one looks good, but it's probably not going to be a fit because it's in a floodplain. Seller carried financing, section 7, the land sale contract, it used to be that, when I first started selling real estate, it was, interest rates were 17%. And, yep, and we were doing things like trades and seller carried financing. My parents bought second trust deeds on my first 3 transactions to make them go together. And that's why I bought my first house, is because my parents participated on the other side of getting me some commissions. And fortunately, we had attorneys involved, and those attorneys, those people paid off their trust deeds. But that was really a common. You shouldn't see this very often right now. The seller carried financing is not very common. Rent to own, etc. Rent to own. Most attorneys and people will tell you to try to avoid those things. Lease options, rent to own. All it is you're not going to get paid. You know, you're spending a lot of time trying to get somebody in out of the goodness of your heart, and you're probably never going to get paid on it. So I would encourage your people not to do that. And right now in this market, you shouldn't have to. Some markets are different, but this market is not. Okay, section 8. Talks about additional financing provisions. If you're going to need a cosigner on a loan, that's where you would put that. Those types of things would go on section 8. If you get in a position where there's some seller carried financing questions going on, there's all kinds of rules that talk about how that has to work and how that has to be done, whether you need to have a licensed loan originator or not. So as soon as you see seller carried financing on one of your, an offer comes in and it's on your listing, get your principal broker involved. It's pretty complicated as to whether an attorney has to be brought in, or a licensed loan originator, or if you can make it work with your situation. Section 9, title insurance. Seller is stating that it states that the seller at their sole expense will order a preliminary title report, and that report and all the documents of proof, which are the exceptions on the title report, will be sent to the buyer and their agent. Upon receipt of the report, the buyer has 5 days, unless the buyer and seller agree to more, within which to notify the seller in writing of any items that are not acceptable. Seller has 5 days from the receipt of the objection to remove or correct the item. Buyer can terminate and not lose their earnest money. For example, an old easement that isn't being used shows up on a prelim and the encroachment is noted. The CC&Rs don't allow a ham radio tower, limits the number of breeds of pets. You know, if you've got a condo, oftentimes they'll be breeds specific that pretty much will kill a deal. So just be aware of that. Be sure to review the preliminary title report. When it comes to you, now all of the title companies have, the preliminary title report comes, it has hot links. There's hot links to all the documents. This is so cool. It used to be that we would look at it and call and say, I want a copy of this exception, this exception, this exception. Then we'd have to wait for them to come. Now when the title report comes, you can click on it and see the CC&Rs. You can see the bylaws. You can see a lot of things that are exceptions. If there's an easement that looks kind of, you look at the preliminary title, you look at the plat and you can't see where the easement is, and all of a sudden this easement comes through, there's the documents that are attached that say, oh my gosh, this was here since 1900. It was before the property was platted. This is just hanging around here on this property. It's probably never going to be of any effect to the borrower, but they may or may not want it to be there. The lender may or may not want it to be there. So sometimes you go through the process of vacating the easements and pretty much just making them void, where the person who's benefiting from the easement isn't even, it's because of the way the property was platted, they're out of it, and it's just some paperwork that just didn't get done. So sometimes you might end up involved in making sure that that's cleaned up. Again, not a real common happening. Section 10, inspections, environmental health condition. This is really a pretty much telling everybody that there's environmental conditions, asbestos, carbon monoxide, electromagnetic fields, formaldehyde, lead. All of these things might be in a property. This is a buyer advisory that these things all could come up to play. And here's a couple links to some Oregon Health Division information on these problems, and if they want to get an inspection on it, they can. You can have electromagnetic fields. If you are in a property that has a big cell towers, the 500K lines right there, if their buyer is interested and concerned, you can obtain that. And I have always, every time I've sold something near a cell tower of any kind, not cell tower, but the electronic power lines, I always bring that up. Because it's a test that they can have, and I would really rather they have the test, especially if there's kids in the house. It may be totally no big deal, but I want them to explore it if it's of interest to them. I had somebody recently who said, you know, I don't believe in that, it's not a concern to me, I'm buying it and I'm not gonna pay for that test, end of story. But I at least did my part by explaining that they had the option and what the cost of the inspection would be. So licensed professional inspection is the buyer's expense. The buyer may have the property and all elements and systems inspected by one or more licensed professionals of the buyer's choice, provided the buyer must specify and identify in this agreement any desired invasive inspections that may include testing or removal of any portion of the property, including radon and mold. If you are having a general home inspection, this is pretty much what it covers. If you go on further to line 196, identify invasive inspections. On this one, this transaction, it's the radon test and the sewer scope. Even though it doesn't seem like it's invasive, the radon test can be very, it's a problem. I always like getting out of the summer months, but if you have somebody who's in a house with no AC, and you're gonna put up a radon unit in there and say for 2 days you have to keep your doors closed except to come and go, and they have no AC, you know, 90-degree weather, it's a problem. Sometimes people have to leave for a couple days in order to have their radon test taken. So it's not a bad idea to.
Would the well go under that?
No, there is a separate well agreement.
Yeah,
214.
Yeah, yeah.
so those are pretty standard, radon is,
I'd say radon and sewer are really, really important. You're doing a general home inspection. Let's say you have a new construction, a house, new construction. A lot of people say, well, why should I have these tests if it's under warranty? Because builders don't do things right. And they'll say, well, gee, I've had all my people in here, and I've had the city in here, and I've got all these city approvals, and here's my list of permits that have been approved. And then they go to look, and you know what? There's something caught in the sewer line, and it shows up the first day they move into the house. So the sewer is really, really important to always get it scoped, even on new construction. Just to make sure that you can have the whole sewer line could be collapsed because a big piece of heavy equipment went over it and collapsed, or they're now offset, the joints are offset, and you have a problem. So that's really important. As far as the radon test, all of the builders are they're required to plumb for the radon. They don't put in a radon emission system. So depending on where it is, I always get a radon test. The other thing I'll do with a new construction is I'll tell my buyer that it has a passive system in there already. However, I would suggest that you get a canister and you put the canister on the top of a shelf, and it's a 3-month or a 1-year canister, and before the home, the 1-year walkthrough, the builders are required to give a 1-year warranty for any property that they sell that they've just built. Before that, I would get a radon test analyzed, and then they'll know what they have. The builders feel that the cost of putting in a subterranean system with the fans is not going to be nearly as expensive as it would be if all the plumbing isn't in there. Does this make sense? I mean, I'm probably kind of starting in the middle of something that some people may not be familiar with. Are you familiar with radon?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody's
Read
a
about
little bit?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, radon is a colorless,
Electromagnetic.
it's a gas that comes from the breakdown of uranium in the soil. And uranium is in the soil in some places more than others. You get up on the Alameda Ridge in Portland, it's just hot. Parts of Lake Oswego near the iron smelters, hot. Yeah, I had someplace out in Dundee that was, the 4 is, with the World Health Organization, says it's a 2 picocuries is a limit before somebody has to do something. The United States, US Health Organization says 4. So if it's over 4 is when they usually come in and do remediation on it. I've had them at 25. So, you know, hey, this is a little hot. You do want to take care of your people. So I get radons on almost everything.
So what does the builders do? They put in a fan system in the crawl space? Is that what they do?
It's a subterranean. They have a fan that usually is on the outside, and then it vents underneath the house.
It pulls it out.
Right. They have all of the plumbing is put in right now. It's not always put in according to what a radon emissions person will think is as adequate. The builders do it their way. There's no real good regulation on how builders put it in Oregon. Washington is different.
The
Washington,
regulation on it, just they do it the way they think they can get away with it.
yeah, right. Maybe it's about.
How much does that cost? What's the range?
It's not ridiculous. I mean, I think I've had the highest radon emissions test was, or radon system was $1,800. So it's a square footage, how big the property is, and that's putting it in with nothing there in an older house.
Okay. And the sellers pay for that? Or split it?
Sellers, I always prep my sellers to let them know that oftentimes any health issues are usually health, mold, radon, septic, sewer, those things are usually going to end up the buyer will ask. We'll ask the seller to take care of those things.
So based on your experience, when you add up all these important tests, right, what's the range of cost there, from the lowest to the highest?
Well, a general home inspection usually starts around $450, and they can go up to $650 depending on the size and the square footage of the house. And then you put on a radon test of 125 to 150, and a sewer scope for the 125 to 150.
Yeah. And then the discount for both.
Right, and if there's electromagnetic field, I've seen those about 85, 90. A septic system is another whole process. A septic, fortunately our new forms are really good about saying, okay, these are what, usually with a septic, somebody comes in and has to pump the septic, and then somebody else has to uncover the distribution box. And then the inspector comes in and they blow the lines to make sure that they're working. So a septic inspection is pretty complicated, and you'll want to have somebody kind of walk you through that if you get to working in land and with wells and septics, because it's pretty
Well,
specific.
inspection's a separate one too.
And that's split between the seller and the buyer, right?
In the case of
It's all negotiable.
Pull it out.
well, usually it's the seller, in my experience, usually pays for the pumping. The buyer,
inspection.
yeah, the buyer oftentimes, and the seller oftentimes will pay for the uncovering of the distribution box, because they want to be kind of in control of how their land is being dug up. But the buyer pays for the inspection of all the systems.
Yeah, I have a current buyer who is going to do an addition on the home. And the contractor said, we can test for radon when we're doing our work. The neighborhood has checked out over the years for 0 radon emissions. So I took that risk, and I said, it's going to happen soon anyway. You're going to break ground and you need to do radon anyway. So they decided to wait and just did the sewer scope.
Okay.
So.
It's like, whenever, and that's something, again, whenever you offer a service that you really think they should have and they say no, I always follow it up with an email saying, just to follow up, we talked about this, this, and this today, you're giving me instructions to do this, this, and this.
Yes.
And then you have something of record as to you did your job in recommending any kind of thing that that will protect them.
Now, to narrow it down for a client, does SUMA have a list of contractors that would be available for that, or that we know that are reliable, basically?
I think we do, and usually you'll check with different people in your office and who they use.
Yeah. Give me a call. I know lots of vendors who do that. So.
Yeah. There's been efforts many times in trying to put together master lists, but then vendors come and go, and then it's hard to, you call them and they're no longer in business, so it
Right.
seems to be more of a word of mouth, and, yeah.
And every broker wants their vendor on there, and it's like they get pissed that another vendor's on there, and then their vendor's not on there, and so
And
that's kind of how it happens.
I know Gary Taylor was always great in saying, okay, these are 3 vendors for your inspection, 3 for everything. I have vendors that I really trust that have stepped up and have been wonderful. So if my inspector goes out and he misses something on a home inspection, I know he'll stand up and he'll, forfeit the cost of his inspection if need be because of something he's missed. So I feel very confident that I've got the best inspector that I try to use. So this is always a point of discussion, that if you give them 3 choices, they are in control and they're responsible for their own choices. I'd rather have one person that I know will always stand by them, by what their work is. So that's the way I approach it.
It goes back to establishing your team. You want just like you want your title rep, your lender, you want your contractor, you want your inspector, you want your radon tester, even
Your sewer.
Your sewer
septic.
scopers, and
Well, it's good you mentioned 3, because I was just reading my studies too that you should do that, because if you only recommend one and then that contractor is not good, then you could be liable, right? Because
Well, when it comes down to doing work, I try to give them more than one, for sure, like getting bids and stuff. I wouldn't say, oh, this is the best roofer, you don't want to go with anybody else, because there is liability if they turn out to really drop the ball on something. But as far as the inspections, if I have confidence in my team, then I feel good about that. Okay.
Would it be okay if we took a break, like?
Oh, of course, I'm sorry. I just get going and I. How long have I been
Lenders
job?
and mortgage companies and escrow, they're gonna be all calling you, and you just interview them. I interviewed.
You guys. So going on to page 5, you should initial where the buyer initials at the bottom. I wanted to talk about the alternative inspection addendum, OREF 058. It is an addendum that has check boxes as to every single inspection that you might choose to order for someone. It is a form that I love what it says. I think it's a great form. It scares a lot of sellers if you choose to use it. So I would be very, very careful with you using it, and be very careful not to check every box. I am more likely to use I would sign off on 180, line 180, licensed professional inspection, add a couple of the tests that I want, and if I see a need for more, I would go back with an addendum saying I'm going to ask for these inspections as well. But your whole point in this form is to get the deal. You want to get them to accept your offer, not to be scared off by an addendum that looks like you're going to do asbestos and, tear the house apart, and all those things are very intimidating to people. So I've lost deals. I had one that was the only thing. I put that in there, and I didn't include everything, but because of using that form, a lender, it was a foreclosure house, REO, and they chose the other buyer because I used that form. So I'm very careful now. Have you had any problems with that, Tyler?
No, I have not yet.
I've lost a deal where I was representing the seller, and the buyer's agent decided that they were gonna add something on after the fact, and it was supposed to be the day of inspections, and they actually brought somebody in for a radon inspection, and that was not specified, and
Seller refused?
Yeah, basically just threw the deal.
Well, and I always counsel my sellers that it's really a good idea not to say no to an inspection, I mean, that, I've had sellers refuse,
Mhm.
and all it does is it looks suspicious.
With the day out.
Yeah, do you really wanna sell your house? You know, if you wanna sell your house, make it available, so, but that, you know, you can't, some sellers have definite ideas and you
In a
can't change
competitive
them.
situation, wanna make it clean as possible, really, you know, at the same time, wanna protect your client.
Exactly, exactly. We talked a little bit about, title insurance, inspection, environmental health,